Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the fantasy standalones that I want to get to next year. Now, if you have seen my general plans and goals video for 2023, you do know that I want to use these TBR jars. One for the ongoing series that I've either started this year or maybe the year before or the year before that I really want to finish in 2023, and then one for the fantasy standalones that I physically own. Now, if everything goes according to plan, that will mean that every month I pick a fantasy standalone, and by the end of the year I will have finished 12 fantasy standalones that way. Now, of course, I will be reading more fantasy standalones whenever I am in the mood for something. I will put them on my seasonal TBR, or I will just pick them up randomly. I will have also probably new releases or newly acquired books that I just want to read, and then that happens. But these will be randomly picked. These will add a little bit of chaos and excitement. And to be honest, I am a child at heart, so this will increase my enjoyment in reading. I find this a very exciting idea, so I'm just going to go with it, I suppose. Now, I actually went through my physical shelves and I saw that in total I have 17 fantasy standalones that I own and have not read yet. So, without further ado, I will talk about these 17. These are the titles that will be in the TBR jar and that I will possibly draw every month. I'm very excited for this, so let's get to the list. And the first one is already a heavy hitter because that is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. Now, this is of course an Arthurian legend retelling. It's 850 plus pages, so it's a big boy, but I think that this is a good one for me to read because I have been reading some Arthurian legend retellings and I've actually never really read the original works. Now, of course, this is also a retelling, but from what I have heard, it remains quite closely to the original, so maybe one that I should give a try. A big one, but one that I have heard great things about. Now, next, of course, I also have some fairy tales, and the next two are ones that I will probably read in 2023, whether or not they get picked by the TBR jar. The first one is Bryony and Roses by T. Kingfisher. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, if I'm not mistaken. I read The Raven and the Reindeer by her, which is a Snow Queen retelling, and it's in the same series, you could say, and I absolutely adored that. It was one of my favorite reads of 2021, so of course I am eager to pick this one up, and it is only 200 pages, so definitely a quick read that you can easily use as a palate cleanser between some big boys, part of a series. Perfect. The other one is actually one that has been recommended to me because this is a more OG fairy tale, you could say, and that is The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. This is the story about the love between, I think, a mortal human and then an immortal fairy, and it asks what happens following happily ever after. I love that. I hope that this is going to be very tragic, like lovers who are just not meant to be. I love those types of stories, so definitely one that I hopefully will be able to pick up in 2023 as well. But since there are 17 standalones and there are 12 months in 2023, I think that the chances are pretty high. Next up, I have a standalone, but it might not be a standalone. Let me explain. That is Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. Now, this is a collection of short stories set in the world of the First Law universe. So it might not really be a standalone because it's definitely tied into a series. However, I have a couple of reasons why I still want to put it in the list and in the TBR jar, basically. First of all, I have not found a lot of grimdark standalones, if any. So if you do know one, please let me know, because I just wanted to have a grimdark in the jar as well to have a little bit extra possibilities and excitement, but I couldn't find any. So that's number one, that I want to have it in the jar. I wanted to have a grimdark. Second of all, I am not the biggest fan of short stories, and even though I know that I will probably enjoy this one because I have enjoyed the majority of books in the First Law universe, I did not like Best Served Cold, but everything else was great. This features the same world, of course, it features some of the same characters, so I will probably have a good time, but I am going to finish the Age of Madness trilogy next month, and I just don't think that I will ever come back because I am not the biggest fan of short stories. So I need to have a little bit of a push to pick this one up. So maybe it being a part of the jar will help. So even though I know that it not exactly fits the standalone aesthetic, it's still part of the list. Next, I also have two novellas. Now, normally we have novellas in November, and I did not participate this year, but last year I did, and I went on a little bit of a shopping spree then. I did finish quite a bit of those novellas, but these are the two that I haven't gotten to yet. The first one is The Haunting of Tramcar 015 by P. Jelly Clark. I actually read another standalone by him, which I did not really enjoy that much at the time, but this is completely different. First of all, I think that you can see from the cover, it's a more modern setting. I'm not the biggest fan of that usually, but I just want to give it a try, and it is more of a horror slash fantasy story. It's definitely a little bit spooky, I have heard, because of course you have The Haunting of Tramcar. Now, this is a standalone, but if I'm not mistaken, P. Jelly Clark has written more of a series in the same world with the same premise, maybe some of the same characters as well. But for now, this novella at the very least can be read as a standalone. Next up, I have another novella, and that is The Drowning Eyes by Emily Foster. This is more traditional fantasy, but a little bit out of my wheelhouse, because here we have pirates. And these pirates, which have dragon ships, go to one of the towns to, of course, raid. Now, in these towns, we have magicians, which are called wind speakers. Yes. So these, of course, can change the wind, and this will be very bad for those pirates. But these wind speakers have lost their magic. And now you have one apprentice who can hopefully save everyone. And then we also have a different POV who is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the pirates, or at least it's a captain. So I think that this will be a nice one. And again, it's one that I usually just don't prioritize, because that's the thing that happens to novellas. So hopefully with the jar and with novellas in November, these two get read in 2023. Something that I have seen happen to fantasy standalones quite often, or at least it's something that caught my attention, is that when the first book gets received quite well, you often see a companion novel or a sequel arrive in a couple of years. And I think that that's the same thing that happened to this one. I bought it as a standalone, but now we do have a sequel or a companion novel. However, I will read this as a standalone because that's how I bought it, and that is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. Now, of course, if I love this first one, I will pick up the sequel, but at the very least, you can read this one as a standalone. If I'm not mistaken, we follow a goblin here, and he is very far in line of the throne, so he doesn't really live close to court. But then a freak accident happens, and all of a sudden he is the Goblin Emperor. He's not used to court, he's not used to political intrigue, but somehow he needs to try to survive and to adjust. Now, I don't really know if I'm going to like this. I have seen very mixed reviews. People who absolutely love this book, people who absolutely hate it and DNF it. So I guess that I will have to see for myself. I think that one of the things that I have heard is that it's quite slow and that there's not a lot of action. But if that's the case, I will probably enjoy it because I like boring stories. So yes, one that I will give a try, and if I like it, I will read the sequel, but for now I will treat it as a standalone. Then, of course, some more fairy tales. The first one that I have here is The Black Swan by Mercedes Lackey. This is a retelling of Swan Lake. We follow one of the swans, Odette, of course, but we also follow the daughter of this evil wizard. Now, I tried this one a couple of years ago on audiobook, and I did not like the narrator at all, but I don't think that that's a reason to not give this book a chance. So I will try this one in 2023. I will read it physically, and hopefully I will like it, because Mercedes Lackey is another author that I think I will like. She has written a ton of works, both fairy tale retellings, a lot of standalones, also a lot of series, the Arrow series, if I'm not mistaken. I love those covers, they're very old school, and Mercedes Lackey, I think that I will like her. But of course, we started on the wrong foot with that narrator that I did not enjoy. Still want to give this one a try. And The Swan Lake is a fairy tale that I really enjoyed as a child, but I don't really see a lot of retellings. So another reason that it must be high on my priority list. Next up, an author that I am going to read next year, and that is, of course, Patricia A. McKillop. The book that I still have is the Book of Atrix Wolf. Now, I also have The Winter Rose on my TBR, but I hope to read that one before the end of the year, so then this is the only physical book by her that I still have on my physical TBR. I don't really know too much about this. Patricia A. McKillop is an author who writes a ton of original fairy tales, as well as fairy tale retellings of unknown fairy tales, you could say. But I do think that this is an original one. Because the actual story is always quite solid, and it's more the writing style of Patricia McKillop that makes you love the book. I don't know what this is about. I think it's about a wizard who lives in exile. Could be completely wrong here, but want to give it a try regardless. Also, these fairy tales are quite short. This one is 240 pages. The font is absolutely massive, so this is one that you can definitely fly through. The next two standalones that I'm going to talk about are TBR veterans, if you will. They have been on my shelves for quite some time. The first one that I have here is Lancelot by Giles Christian. Now, this is of course another Arthurian legend retellings, but as I said before, I don't really know the original story, so of course I know who Lancelot is, but not really a lot about him. And I do know that he is an interesting character. Some people love him, some people hate him. So quite excited to read this one. I read a sample a couple of years ago, and I loved the writing style. It's very poetic, very whimsical, so that's something that definitely intrigued me here. And this is also a standalone, but in the meantime, a sequel, companion novel. I talked about this before. It happens when a standalone gets received quite well. Also came out, which is called Camelot. So if I like this one, I will probably read Camelot in the upcoming years. But since you can read this one as a standalone, that's how I'm going to look at it right now. And then the other TBR vet, this is shameful. And that is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Now, this book has been on my TBR quite a bit of times, and to be honest, I DNF'd it a while ago. I think that I was at page 60, so not that far in. I was new to fantasy, and at that point, I thought that 60 pages was enough to either really draw me into the story or to decide that this was a DNF. And now I'm not so sure. I'm more used to fantasy, to epic fantasy, and I know that 60 pages, especially if the book is 900 pages long, is not that much. So I wanted to give it another try. This was on my fall TBR of this year. It's almost the end of December. I'm not going to start this one. I'm behind on my fall TBR and this is not a priority. However, I still really want to give this one a chance. There are high chances that I will DNF it, but at least then I know. So this is going to go on the list. This is going to be part of the TBR jar, and pray for me that this is not the pick for January, because I do not know how I will finish it if that's the case. And then I just think that I need to finally let go of the idea that I will ever read this book. But for now, it's on the list and I am going to give it one final chance. Now, as you guys know, I have this beautiful Christmas tree behind me and I love that Christmas tree, but I have not been too smart in arranging the Christmas tree. I have two standalones that are above on my shelves and I cannot access them. The first one is Windhaven by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle. This is a TBR veteran, to be honest, because I have it for over 10 years, I think. I read the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin, loved it, and I wanted to read more by him. This was also around the time that the TV show was coming out, so of course all the physical bookshops had George R. R. Martin. And I was picking between either Fever Dream or Windhaven. Now I went with Windhaven and it's completely different than A Song of Ice and Fire, so I read maybe again 20 pages, decided this is not A Song of Ice and Fire and I wanted more of A Song of Ice and Fire, so let's just not continue. And I never did. So now I do want to give it a try. I think that Lisa Tuttle is probably the main author and George R. R. Martin's name is just bigger on the cover. But yes, from what I've heard of it, it is quite nice and it's an interesting story. It's of course much shorter, it's not as epic in scope as A Song of Ice and Fire, but I still want to give it a try since I own it for over 10 years and maybe it's time to decide if it's for me or not. Then we have a new release that I was extremely excited for this year, but then the reading slump hit, I tried it and it just wasn't the right time. That is The Witch and the Tsar by Olesya Salnikova-Gilmore. Now, this is, of course, a fantasy standalone. It's set in Russia, and it is also historical fantasy. We follow Baba Yaga and we follow the Tsar, and of course, there's going to be some kind of conflict here. Now, when I think of Russian folklore fantasy, I think of the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, which is very atmospheric, fairy tale-esque. It just has a certain vibe to it. This one did not have that vibe. I read the first 100 pages and it just didn't really click for me. Baba Yaga is young, Baba Yaga has the house on the chicken legs, she is very funny, it's like a quirky type of retelling, and I just really wasn't feeling it because I was expecting something else. I still really want to give it another chance when I'm out of the reading slump, and if I don't pick this with the TBR jar every month, then I will of course read this in the colder winter months, so it will take me a year, but by the end of 2023 I want to have read this one for sure. And let's hope that now that I'm out of my reading slump, I will be able to adjust to a retelling of Russian folklore that I'm not really expecting. Another new release that I really wanted to get to this year and it just didn't happen is Electra by Jennifer Saint. This is a Greek myth retelling. I read Ariadne by her and absolutely adored it. I just really am a sucker for Greek myths, so if it's a retelling, especially with a female POV, I am going to be happy. And of course the same is true for Electra. Now, to be honest, I like to go into my myth retellings as blind as possible and then look up the myth afterwards and see the differences. That way I'm never really angry about an adaptation if it's not extremely true to the source. So in the same vein, I don't really know what Electra is about. I know that Electra is a figure in Greek myth, that's it. And that's how I like to just keep it before I finish or before I start reading the book. But these covers are beautiful. I know that she has Ariadne, she now has Electra, and I think that in 2024 a new standalone in that series of Greek myth retellings is coming out. So by that time I do hope that I have finished Electra. The last book that I have on the list is definitely outside of my normal wheelhouse, and that is The Winter Garden by Alexandra Bell. Now, it's still a fantasy standalone, but it is in a more modern setting, and it is in our own world, if I'm not mistaken. This is either the late 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, and we follow Beatrice. Beatrice needs to marry a man that her late father approves, but she does not love, and then she receives an invitation to make the most magnificent winter garden. Now, the winner of this contest gets one wish granted. That's all I need to know. It feels like a fairy tale, it feels like it will be perfect to read in winter, but since that has not happened 2 winters in a row, I will still be happy if I read it any time of the year because of a pick of my TBR jar. So, one that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, but I do hope that this is a great one. And in any case, since it is outside of my wheelhouse, it often feels a little bit fresh when I read one of those. Another one is a retelling of The Nutcracker, for example. Did I think that was the best book I've ever read? No, but because of the modern setting, I still think about it from time to time because it's so different from the fantasy books that I normally read. So hopefully The Winter Garden gets read next year, and hopefully I will enjoy it. Now, of course, I will be acquiring standalone books next year, and my question for you is, should I then also add them to the TBR jar, or should I keep them for the backlog fantasy that I've had on my shelves for at least a couple of months? And of course, those new releases or my newly acquired fantasy standalones, I can still read them because I would put them on a seasonal TBR or something like that, but should I put them in a jar? Or should I keep those for the fantasy books that I have been neglecting for way too long? Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Now, these are the 17 books for now that I have on this TBR jar. I really hope that I will get to them soon. Please let me know if you've read any of these or if you also have some standalones that you want to get to next year. If you want to see the series that I am going to start next year, hopefully, again, I am quite ambitious it seems, you can watch that video right here. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this video and see you next time. Bye!